So you don't want to start by taking yourself completely apart, but that doesn't mean people won't do it. They do it all the time. In fact, to me it's always a mystery that they don't do it every single time, because the logical inference for why didn't you get someone interested in you could easily be because you're a failure as a human being. And at some level that's actually true. Now it's true in a way that's not that helpful, right? Because it's just too catastrophic. But it isn't obvious at all how people can defend themselves against that cascade of catastrophizing. I mean, after all, if you were everything you could be, then maybe everyone would be attracted to you. I mean, perhaps not, but you get the point. And no easy rationalization is going to let you just brush that away, especially if you actually happen to be interested in the person, because that's even worse, because then not only are you rejected, but you're rejected by someone upon whom you've projected an ideal, or perhaps from whom you've actually observed an ideal. So it's worse. You're rejected by someone that you want to be attracted to you, to validate your own miserable existence. It's not a trivial problem. So you're in this protected space that I made an analogy between that and the Garden of Eden, or the city that Buddha was raised in. It's all protected and everything inside it is beautiful and functional. And that's by definition, because if your frame of reference is working properly, then what's within it is things you control that are functional and they're serving your purposes. So when you're successful, you're in the Garden of Eden. That's one way of thinking about it. When the things that you're laying out in the world are delivering what they're supposed to deliver, that's what you inhabit. But the problem is that there's always a snake inside the garden. And that's the story that's echoed in the story of Buddha. In that case, it's Buddha's own curiosity that happens to be the snake, and you could actually say the same thing about human beings. Maybe it wasn't the snake, maybe it was Eve's curiosity. They're the same thing in some sense. And so it's Buddha's curiosity that drives him outside the city to find disease and death and to blow apart his paradisal conceptualization of the world. And so when we're looking at for universality, the first thing we might say is, well, you have a frame of reference that you've laid on the world. It's a story. You live inside a story. And the second thing and that's universally true. The content of the story can differ. That's okay. I don't care about that. It's the structural equivalence that I'm interested in. You live inside a story. And you have to, because you have to live in something like that, because you are goal-directed, and you have to be. And you have to simplify the world, because you're just not enough of you to take into account everything at once. In fact, you can hardly take into account anything at once. So you have to narrow things unbelievably. And by narrowing and including only certain things, you exclude virtually everything else. So you're always in the situation where you have this little bounded universe that you inhabit, but outside of it is chaos itself. And so that's the existential landscape. Order surrounded by chaos, right? It's like a tree. It's like the evolutionary home of primates, the tree with the snakes on the ground. That's our landscape. Or it's the fire for tribal people, and the terrors of the forest that are beyond the light that the fire casts. It's explored territory versus unexplored territory, and that's an archetype as well. You can't not be in a situation where that's the case, even if you're among friends. You think that's explored territory. That's not exactly right, because what happens if you're among friends is that they carefully reveal new parts of themselves all the time. So it's like they're blasting little elements of unexplored territory at you constantly. And if they don't, then what happens? You get bored and you look for new people. And we know there's empirical data on that with regards to intimate relationships, because there was a nice study done a while back showing that, looking at the ratio of positive to negative emotional experiences that were most predictive of long-term relationship success. And the answer was, now obviously it depends on how you would measure an event and how you would measure positive and negative emotion, but that aside, the finding was something like, if you're in a relationship and you only have 5 positive interactions to 1 negative interaction, then the relationship will end. It's too negative. But if you have more than 11 positive interactions to one negative interaction, then it also ends. And you think, well, that's pretty bloody peculiar. Why in the world would that be? Don't you want like 100 to 1 positive to negative interactions? And the answer to that is, what makes you think that you want a relationship so that you can be happy? Or at least happy moment to moment? Why do you think that? It's certainly not the case. You know that too, because I bet you there's not a person in this room who hasn't rejected someone because they were too nice to them. Something like that. Person's no challenge. It's something like that. You want someone who, you know, you can get along with them, but now and then they bite you and you think, oh, that's interesting. You know, I didn't really expect that. And then you go and puzzle over it for a while and you torture yourself about it, and that's one of the things that keeps you really linked into the relationship. And the reason for that is that part of the reason that you want the relationship isn't so that you're happy right now. It's so that you can live a high quality life across multiple decades. And so you're looking for someone that you have to contend with, who's going to push you beyond what you already are, and who's going to judge you harshly often for your limitations. Now that'll make you angry and all of that, you know, and resentful, and maybe you'll take your revenge and all of that, but you don't want someone who thinks you're perfect in your current form, partly because why would you want to go out with someone that deluded? So, okay. So you've got this interpretive schema laid out on the world, and it excludes the entire world, and because it excludes the world tends to manifest itself inside that protected space in an uncontrollable manner, and that can take you down, and it takes you down the rabbit hole, and down the rabbit hole is where everything is, because when you make an error, what that is the manifestation of the excluded world. And the problem with that is that's too much, right? Because if you step out of the lifeboat into the ocean, then you drown, and that's not any good. You can't drown every time something manifests itself that you didn't expect. There has to be a mechanism for orienting you in the face of error. All right, so what exactly does that imply? The question is, what do you discover when you go down the rabbit hole? I was thinking about that a lot today. I showed you that diagram that I thought was like a map of the phenomenological world. The lowest resolution category is something like the dragon of chaos. And so you might say, well, what do you discover when you make an error? And the answer is, first, it's a brief manifestation of the dragon of chaos. And that's no more to say than when you encounter the incursion of unexplored territory into explored territory, the circuitry you use is the same circuits that we use to respond instantaneously to the presence of predatory forces. We use that circuit, and that makes perfect sense, because the predator is almost by definition the thing that lurks beyond the safe confines of the community. And I told you, I believe, a story about rats raised in naturalistic environments. The rats they've got their burrows on one end of the little field, their little rat hierarchy, they're doing their little rat social things, they're playing and they're laughing and they're tickling each other and they're raising their rat families, and that's all working out just fine. Rats in that situation, by the way, are very difficult to get addicted to cocaine. If you want to addict a rat to cocaine, you have to put it in a cage and isolate it. It's not really a rat anymore then, any more than you're a person if you're in solitary confinement, right? I mean, you're just misery. Anyways, in solitary confinement, you'd be after cocaine non-stop, and maybe under other circumstances, but like a normal rat, it's not that interested in cocaine. So that's just a side note. Anyways, the rats are doing their thing, and then they've learned that they can go out to the other side of the field and they can get food. And so one day the experimenters, instead of putting food out there, put a cat out there. And the rat goes out and gets a whiff of the cat, which they do not like, and then the rat runs home and pokes his beak out of the burrow and screams for like 2 days ultrasonically, and all the other rats are like frozen stiff because of that. They're not going anywhere. And so a 2-day rat screaming fit is no trivial thing. I calculated, that'd be the equivalent of you screaming for 2 weeks. So you have to be pretty upset to scream for 2 weeks, right? So this is hard on the rat. But the reason I'm telling you this is the rat doesn't expect the cat to be there. The rat goes out and there's a cat, And what it uses is its predator detection and alert systems to signify the presence of the cat. And what we've done with the dragon imagery, roughly speaking, is make an amalgam of predatory monsters and state that's a symbol for what lurks beyond safety. Because we're observing our own responses in some sense, and it's not only that we're observing our own responses, but that we also have a categorical set of responses to predator. And again, there's no speculation about this. We already know this. Like if you go study monkeys, for example, they have distinct sets of vocalization that are associated with predator detection that have distinct circuits. We know that there are predator detection circuits, and it's not unreasonable to also presuppose that they underlie the phenomena, for example, that human beings are very good at learning fear to snakes. Snake fear might be innate, like that's pushing the argument. But at minimum, psychologists have already concluded that even if snake fear isn't innate, and it probably is, that it can be learned like that. So you can condition people to be afraid of pictures of snakes way faster than you can condition them to be afraid of pictures of electrical outlets or handguns. So, and that's well documented. I don't think anybody disputes that at all. So the first assumption is when something unexpected emerges, so we'll call that the snake in the garden, that you're prey and that's a predator, and that the monster has come to get you. It's something like that. Now the representation of the dragon is more complex than mere monster, because the dragon, the mythological dragon, also is the thing that hoards treasure. And I really like that symbol. I think that's also why it will never go away. It's such a great symbol because it says, well, the unknown can take you down. It can bite you with its fiery breath like a poisonous snake, and it can burn things like fire. And it's an aerial predator that can take you from the air, and it's a carnivorous predator that can take you from the ground. And it's reptilian. It's the sort of thing that can pull you down into the water. And it's easy to see that as an amalgam of the threats that have been laid forth for human beings since the beginning of time. And monster is an amalgam of predator. And you might say, well, there's no such thing as a dragon. It's like, yes, there is. It's just a loose category. What's common across all predators equals dragon. It's not like they're not real. They're hyper-real. They're more real than the phenomena themselves, just like an abstraction can be more real than the phenomena themselves. And then the canonical dragon for human beings isn't just a predator. We're not rabbits. You can imagine that the dragon for a rabbit is just a dragon. There's no damn treasure there at all. But for human beings, it's ambivalent, because the thing that you don't know about is also the thing that holds the greatest gift. And why is that? It's because the unrealized world manifests itself when you make an error. And the unrealized world is something that can take you down, obviously, but it's also the source of all new information. It's an infinite source of information, and that's a really useful thing to know. Error is an infinite source of information. And that's one of the things that can help you recalibrate the way that you interact with the world. You think, well, we're interacting. Let's say we're having a conversation, and it's flowing melodically, and all of a sudden I say something, and there's a disjunction, right? You're offended by it. There's some negative emotion that comes up, or maybe I've said something to impress you or to be arrogant, and you respond badly. It's like you've got this melodic thing going on. It's a consensual frame, and something pokes itself up to put a disjunction in the conversation. It's like, well, that's where the information is. It's like something went wrong. Something didn't work out. I'm not looking at the world properly, or I don't know you well enough, or as well as I thought. There's something there, and if I have any sense, I'm going to focus my attention on that. Like, not obsessively or anything like that, but that's where all the information is. Because as long as what we're doing is working, then we both know enough already. As soon as what we're doing together isn't working, then that's instant evidence that there's something about us that needs to be updated. And you might think, well, that's a terrible thing. And the answer is yes, of course it is. It's a terrible thing. But it's also the thing, and this is the next stage of the development of this, let's call it universal morality. It's like the universal morality might be found in the answer to the question, what should you do when you make a mistake? Now, one answer is catastrophic dissolution. That's a collapse into chaos. Well, no one is going to pick that voluntarily. Let's put it that way. It's unbelievably unpleasant, terribly anxiety-provoking, shameful, and painful all at the same time.